Alright guys, today we're going to be showing you how to install the Castle Creations Mamba Monster 2 kit onto the Arrma Kraton. Like I said before, I love this car, this truggy. It's absolutely awesome. It just has a few weaknesses, and the biggest one, most expensive one I guess, is the ESC on here. So we already started taking that stuff out of here. It just kind of unbolts this whole tray right here, unbolts from the bottom. A couple screws, you can see them right there. You'll see them as you go along, and then the ESC and the mount will come out together. Now, of course, I took the engine out already, the motor already, and I started bolting this one up on here, and it bolts up just fine. I'm using the stock pinion for now until I get used to it, make sure there's enough power. I'm sure there will be. There's no reason to go to a bigger pinion and start overheating things on here. One note is that the old screws that held in the Arrma motor, right? They're big, they're huge, they're metric, and they're absolutely huge, right? There's tons of strength to them. For some reason on the Castle one, which you got to realize you're going to need new screws for it, because the ones they gave you are way too short, they're like this long, okay? So it's absolutely worthless, and then they're really small. Look how small that is compared to the other one. And so you're going to have to find the right length on there to bolt it up to the existing mount on here. Otherwise, you can reuse the pinion. The mount's just fine, but you need to have these screws on hand. And this is the way I figured it would mount up best, the same way the wires coming out right here and then going over to the ESC, kind of the way Arrma did it, instead of going up, because then you start getting body fitment issues with the body being in the way and all these wires and everything, chafe points, all that. So I already have the bolts and the pinion already on here, and I've set the mesh on there already. You want to do all of this now before you put the ESC in the way, because it's a lot easier to get in here. And also, when you're doing this, put the blue medium thread locker on all these bolts, including the grub screw on here. This is a very powerful motor. If you don't, it's going to be taking it out real quick soon thereafter with all the vibrations and everything. And also, it's very important, because this is a metal spur gear on here, basically, that you get the adjustment on here just right. Use that paper trick to set your mesh on here correctly. I like to have it just like this. A little bit of give in there. I like to have the teeth a little closer inside of there, and I have no problems with that. And hopefully you guys can see that. It's pretty deep in there, but I still have that looseness in there, so it's not too tight of a mesh on there. But we should have zero problems with it. And what you're also going to notice in this motor is the magnets are super, super strong. So it's going to do this every time you flip over to the next pole on there. I mean, it's super strong, so it takes quite a bit of force. But that's the way I set mine on there. Okay, so now that the motor is all bolted in, everything looks fine, the gear mesh looks fine, the routing looks fine, it's not going to rub on the chassis at all, we're good there. On to the ESC and the mounting of that. What I'm using is the factory bracket right here, the stand that keeps it up and off the chassis pan here, in case there's any kind of, accumulation of water or slush in there, and it'll just seep right into the ESC. So we're up on a raised platform here, so it's a good idea to reuse it. So what I did is I used the 3 bullet connectors. They're going to face this way, and my battery connections are going to face like this. So it just goes right over to the battery, so it seems to work out. And then all my ESC to receiver and fan connections come right down this side like the factory one, and loop underneath to be hooked into there like so. You can see them all down in there hooked in. I just need to adjust the slack on there. And that's for wire management, so I can go underneath the drive shaft in the front here and over to the receiver through that little foam gasket and be waterproof still. So we're kind of following the factory stuff there also. And it's going to mount to the chassis pan the same way like the factory. And the one note I have, if I can get it back and over to the original spot there, is I put the shelf down into there, this bracket, where it lines up with the holes in the pan. And I figured, let me put this back on, because I know it sticks out a little bit, and the pins and everything for it. And I want to make sure that this is far enough over so that the big old wires that come into here wouldn't be rubbing and getting pushed, pushing on the connection here, because this is how the last one broke off on my other truck. It actually put too much pressure on here and popped it right out of there. So when you're mounting the ESC to the bracket, It's a good idea to have all in place and kind of space it out. I went as far over as I could to the edge here so that all of these would be clear, especially this one. And then all I did was use a double-sided industrial Velcro on the bottom side there, and that provides a little bit of a cushion. And this stuff, it's a full size at the bottom side of this ESC, so it's super strong even if there was a 1-inch strip on here. And the whole bottom of it, like I said, is covered and then stuck to this right here, so I can take it out if I have to, and I can take it off of here if I want to change it out or service it or otherwise. So it's a really good idea, and this stuff, this industrial strength Velcro, does not come apart, so that's awesome on there also. One other thing I did, no place to mount the switch, don't need a switch, so I just put the two together and I solder them together and put a heat shrink over that has glue in it. That'll seal out the connection from any kind of moisture and dirt, and that'll be finalized. Maybe I'll tuck it away or zip tie it away. And besides that, we're gonna make sure these wires are just right going down through and underneath here so they don't touch the drive shaft. And we're gonna put the screws back in for this mount right here. And after that, we can start wiring up the motor controls on here, the 3 wires on here properly. And there it is, all installed. You can see I have the mount bolted to the chassis, all the wires run underneath. My excess over here, get a little bit of slack, and then I ran underneath the drive shaft over to the receiver. And make sure you lay all your wires in here flat like so they can get cushion top and bottom and keep all the water and muck out of there. As far as the connections over here on the receiver, it's all the same: steering and then throttle for channel 2. And then for your fan wire here, that can go in any one of these other available ports on here. They all provide battery voltage as long as you plug it in just like this, where the black is on the outside edge like that, so the polarity is correct on there and it'll actually work on there. Besides that, just bolt your cover back on here. Like I said, make sure these wires are not crimped in here. Now, as far as connecting the motor to the ESC, there's 3 different wires on here. Nothing's marked, so where do you put them in at? Well, what I follow, since even Castle gives a very general guide, they basically say you can plug them in here or there, and it really doesn't matter, and blah, blah. Well, what I like to do is follow some kind of uniformity. So what I do is I follow Traxxas and their eRevo setup, and this is the way they have all their eRevos and brushless eMax, all that stuff that used to use this exact setup on there, the green can and the different colored wires. This is how they had it set up on there. So basically it goes from red, white to black on here, and I use that all the time when I install these, their color scheme, and I never have a problem that way. Now also, as you notice, I wire tied it to the tower here, and that's just so these wires aren't dangling off the edge of the onto the the dirt track here. There's gonna be hanging to get caught on stuff, so I get them up and out of the way, keep it a little bit loose so there's not much tension on these also, and it kind of fits perfectly, a nice little arc like that, and it takes all the slack out. What I did do, because the servo horn, when it swung back for the turn, it was rubbing on the negative, no big deal, but I don't want it to happen continuously out in the field, so what I did is I zip tied it back to the tower like I did these, so it's all kind of nice and neat, and that way the mega power wires, all amperage coming through here, and the noise and interference is not wrapping itself around the antenna also, so that's kind of off to the side. Keeps these off to the side when they loop right over, power in and power out, so it's a pretty clean setup. Mainly because it's so easy to work on this vehicle. It's so open. I was able to have all these different options for mounting and securing it in here. Do a general overview of the covers back on for the receiver, so it's waterproof. And I'm going to keep the fan on here because it's summertime now. If it rains out or there's puddles, I'll just avoid them and avoid going out that day. And when it gets back to winter, when it's cold and the cool air will cool the ESC naturally, driving along, then I'll unplug it so I can go through the slop and all that. You don't want that shorting out on there. But otherwise, a very clean install. What do you guys think? And I'm loving this battery so far. 4300 milliamps. It still is not a problem. 40C is definitely enough to handle this motor on here also. So far so good. Alright, so once you have everything installed, you think everything's hooked up correctly, what you need to do now is an ESC calibration. So it knows your endpoints for reverse and full throttle of your particular transmitter. So let's follow the steps in the booklet and then you can go out for a test drive, make sure everything works properly forward and reverse on there. One note I can give you is if you're trying to do a calibration, there's a chance of it running off on you, so make sure the front end of it is against a wall or something like that, or someone holding it, something like that, so when you're doing the calibration, it just doesn't take off on you.